So last year when I was training for my third half Ironman, I was really pushing my volume because I wanted to set like a really solid new PR for myself. And so I was training a lot, but I kept noticing this thing, especially on my rides, where around the 40-mile mark, about 2.5 hours in, I would really start to feel this lag and this drop in energy that made finishing my workouts pretty hard. And I was fueling like I'd always done. I was hydrating like I'd always done. My output up to that point looked fine. So I was really confused. But the more I started looking into it, the more I started realizing that I wasn't actually having a training problem. I was having a fueling problem. And the fix, surprisingly, wasn't going to be just to eat more of what I was already consuming during these workouts. If you're new here, my name is Daniel Steamer. I'm a multi-certified endurance sports coach specializing in running. I've personally completed over 130 races, including 3 marathons, 2 ultras, and 3 half Ironman. And I am currently training for my 4th half Ironman just a few weeks from now, as well as my first full Ironman later this year. And I coach everyday adult athletes from their first run to their biggest adventures. This is what this channel is all about. So that energy drop I mentioned is something we call the wall, or historically used to be called bonking. And if you've ever gone for an hour and a half or more than 2 hours in your training or in a race, you may have experienced this. It is when your fuel tank hits empty because you have run out of energy. And even if you continue to fuel, it's still possible to have this happen. It might just happen at the 3 or 4 hour mark instead. So today we're going to take a little bit of time to look into the science behind this at a very high level. So when we talk about fueling for exercise, we are talking about how much sugar your body can absorb through the digestive system. And this happens in your intestines through a few different transport systems. And the primary one that everybody has been historically focused on, especially in the last decade, is glucose, because that is ultimately what your body uses to fire off your muscles. And the thing is that in our digestive tracts, we have a certain amount of glucose uptake receptors, and those max out at being able to only absorb about 60 grams per hour, which is probably why you may have heard of this number that, 60 grams of, uh, of carbs or 200 calories per hour, because that is the physiological limit that most people have, give or take your genetic differences. But that is only one source of sugar that the body can use. There's also fructose, which comes from fruit sources, but has largely been overlooked because of several studies in the past decades that pointed to some negative health benefits that have mostly been dismissed at this point. So when we look at both of those, there's a potential for 60 grams of glucose as well as an additional 60 grams of fructose, literally doubling your energy potential uptake per hour. And this is something that kind of became big in the last 2 years. It started with, I think, cycling, if I'm not mistaken, but it really took off in trail running in 2025, where a lot of trail running records were smashed by several minutes. And the common factor between all these runners was that they were using a high carb protocol, mixing glucose and fructose. And then we just saw this recently with the London Marathon, where the 2 hour record was broken. And that runner was also using a mixture of glucose and fructose and consuming about 110 grams per hour, according to his self reporting. And so the ratio here, 1 to 1, is pretty important because we're trying to maximize how much of each we're able to uptake. Now, real quick note, there is a third sugar source, lactose, which comes from milk and dairy products, but those don't generally sit well with endurance sports. So, maybe that'll change in the future. Somebody will figure out some sources for that work better, but we generally don't right now consider that in these discussions. But why does any of this matter? Well, because if you think of your body having a gas tank that as you are expending energy, you're burning through your energy supplies, even if you continue to put, more fuel in, if you're burning more than you're putting in, at some point you're going to burn out of all that energy and you're going to hit the wall. And if you can double how much energy you can put in per hour, that really allows you to one of two things. One, have a longer runway before you burn through that energy, or two, run at a higher intensity and still leave you with something left in the tank when you hit that finish line. For most people, we have a sitting amount of energy storage called your glycogen stores, which can fuel intense activity for anywhere from an hour and a half to 2 hours, depending on your conditioning and your training level. But after that, if you do not start filling that tank back up, you are going to run out of energy and have an empty tank and hit that wall pretty fast, which is why fueling is such an important aspect to longer efforts. Something like an Ironman, which I'm going to be doing in 3 weeks, I'm going to be out there for 7 to 8 hours. There's no way I can do that on glycogen alone. I need to fuel during that race. And figuring out the right amount of to fuel so I can go at my race intensity that whole time is really important for success. So if you want to start experimenting and try taking advantage of this new high carb protocol that a lot of runners are starting to use, you're going to have to learn to understand the differences in sugar and how to read labels, because most nutrition supplements for fueling endurance sports really just contain glucose. Now they might list it as something else like dextrose or maltodextrin, but those are just more complicated forms of glucose that will when digested, just break down into multiple glucose molecules. To really get this benefit, you need to get fructose, which really only comes from fruits or a few other sources. And so, if you're just going to be using some standard fuels, you might only be using that one glucose pathway for energy uptake and just totally ignoring the potential for all that fructose uptake. And if you just try to maximize more glucose, go beyond that 60 grams per hour that your body can comfortably absorb, that's where GI issues happen. That's where cramps and nausea and bloating come from. And that's when it makes it even harder to consume as you keep going. And so when people have tried that, either intentionally or mistakenly, they kind of just assume, no, that's too much sugar, I can't consume it. But it's really the wrong conclusion. It's the right concept, but the wrong mix. You really need to get that blend of glucose and fructose in to not have those side effects. So last year when I started experimenting with this, I couldn't find a lot of good chews or gels out there. Now, that said, you probably see some Cliff Blocks behind me. I'm not sponsoring or endorsing them by any means, but their source of sugar is sucrose, table sugar, basic table sugar. And sucrose is awesome because when it breaks apart as a molecule, it is a 50-50 blend of glucose and fructose. So those are a great starting point. Or anything else that uses sucrose is a great starting point for a baseline high carb protocol. But consuming that many grams of sugar from chews alone, honestly, is a lot to take in and a lot to eat while being active. So I started a mix of using chews and drink mixes, and I found several different drink mixes out there that I can blend to create a pretty close to 1-to-1 ratio of glucose and fructose in my drinks. Now, with that all said, when you read these labels, they will tell you if they have glucose or fructose or some more complex form of them in the fuel, but they won't tell you the ratio. So just because something says it has glucose and fructose on its nutrition label, you don't know if that's at a 1-to-1, 2-to-1, 3-to-1, 5-to-1, 10-to-1. You're going to have to do a bit more research there. But through this mixture I came up with myself between drink mixes and chews, I've really upped my total carb intake from around where I used to do around 50 grams per hour. I'm now up to somewhere between 90 to 100 grams per hour without any stomach issues. And it really, especially on my long rides where I'm on my bike for 3 to 3.5 hours, really gives me energy all the way to the end. Last year, I used to be at around 50 grams per hour. Now in my training, especially on the bike, I generally consume around 90 to 100 grams of carbs per hour, and I don't have that energy drop off. I don't feel like I'm having to push extra hard at the end. I really feel like I have something left in the tank every time I get off the bike, even when I've pushed my training this year past the half Ironman point, getting ready for my full Ironman, doing things like 50 and 60-mile rides pretty regularly. And so really the takeaway here is that it wasn't my fitness that was lagging. It was because I was doing such long training sessions that I needed to fuel appropriately to give myself enough energy to make it to the end. Now, as a coach, because of the results I've experienced myself, I've started sharing this with clients this year, and they have also found that it just really helps out with their energy levels. And so I had a client who was moving from the half marathon range up to the full marathon range, where they were really going to be consistently pushing past that 2 hour mark, and especially in their training leading up to their race. And they started mixing their own blend as well, pushing past that 60 grams per hour, and they found that it just made a difference in how much energy they had and how strong they still felt at the end of their runs. Instead of getting to like mile 15 where they were just pushing past the 2 hour mark and feeling like, "Oh my god, I feel like I've run the whole marathon already." They felt like they still had energy to keep going, and it really sustained their training through the process. I've also had clients who have experimented with how they mix and blend stuff to the point of um, even trying to just use raw table sugar because of the fact that sucrose, table sugar, is a combined glucose and fructose molecule. It's just that there's more involved in that process if you're going to go that route. Things like the chews and the drink mixes I use are really just a convenience factor. It's already been pre-measured, but if you want to take the time to weigh and measure your own sugar, it's sugar is sugar. It's the same thing. It's all energy at the end of the day. And honestly, you get a closer to one blend doing it yourself that way. Now, you might just have to factor in, does it taste good? Does it have flavors? And what do you add on top of it in that sense to make it palatable? And so, long story short, with my clients who have pushed past the standard, and I used to give this all the time, the standard advice of 60 grams per hour, they have found that their wall has moved, that they just find it easier to go longer distance, longer duration in both training and races, and maintain a consistent intensity, as well as it just evening out when you go up hills and your intensity spikes for a short burst. There's just an evening out of that because you have plenty of fuel constantly coming in to keep your tank full. So I've thrown a lot out there in this one, but if this is something you're genuinely interested in experimenting with, start small and start by first reading your current fitness labels. Get a sense for what you are actually already consuming. You might have be the thing you're using might be a pure glucose source, like some classic nutrition fuel is, or it might be something that's been a bit more modernized. It might already have some fructose in it, maybe in a 2-to-1 blend, maybe even a 1-to-1 blend. But knowing what's in your fuel is the first step. Then from there, start experimenting with how you can add more while making sure that you don't push the glucose past 60 grams or the fructose past 60 grams per hour. Otherwise, you risk some GI issues, some digestion issues. But also, you can't go from 60 grams per hour to 120 grams per hour overnight. Just like training your muscles, you have to kind of condition your digestive system to handle that much sugar as well. And so just start working it into your training, just like you would add distance week to week, add a little bit more sugar week to week. And also, while this is predominantly beneficial on the long runs, in terms of or rides, in terms of conditioning yourself, there's nothing wrong with fueling during your short workouts too. You'll just have more energy available, even if you would never have burned through what you already had on hand in your glycogen storage to begin with. I personally keep the habit through all my runs just so that I'm always in the mentality of every 15 to 20 minutes of fueling myself. And so just as you're going through the process, just remember to treat any distress, any discomfort as feedback, not as a failure of the system. It's all about this personal experimentation to find what works for you, especially when we're talking about these really long duration events where you're going to be eating the same thing constantly. So if you've been hitting the wall constantly in your training or in your racing, it's really honestly probably not a training issue. It's probably a fueling issue. You are burning through your gas tank faster than you can fill it up, and you're just running into an empty tank before you get to the finish line. So the fix is going to come from understanding what you're putting into your body, how much you're putting in, how often you're putting it in, and what works for you. So when was the last time you experimented with your fueling protocol, and is it maybe time to revisit it? If you find this type of content useful, please subscribe. My goal with this channel is simple. I want to provide adult athletes with the information they need to train well and live their biggest adventures.